So let's have a look at parallel processing, and what that basically means is you're applying effects to a duplicate of a signal in parallel, so side by side, as opposed to in series, which would be audio signal, then the effect in a chain. Now this is where things can get really interesting, because if you've got a compressor, for instance, and you're running it over one of your mixer channels, quite often it can kill the transients and just dull the dynamics down, because the distance between the loudest sound and the quietest sound is much less. That's also known as the dynamic range. It goes more like a sausage waveform, as we discussed earlier. So what parallel processing allows us to do is basically have more control over our signal. So taking our example of the drums, if we were to use parallel compression, what we would do is send all of our drums into one bus, as we discussed in the last lesson, and then create another channel. In Ableton, I'm doing this through an auxiliary channel, so I can determine how much of the bus I'm going to send through to that channel. And what that's doing is simply duplicating it. So here is our normal drum bus. And we've sent the entire signal through to our parallel channel. So it's just doubling the volume. But what we can now do is add some very heavy compression to this drum channel that you wouldn't dream of adding on the main channel, because it would add all sorts of distortion and kill the life out of it, like this. Sounds horrible, right? Okay, so let's see what happens when we take some of the bass frequencies out of our heavily compressed signal. Take it right down and then play our drums again. But now we can start adding in this very heavily compressed signal and hear what happens. Okay, we'll turn it off. Hear how much more in your face those drums now sound, and it's still got the transients of the dry drums. Now parallel compression is extremely powerful for getting more energy into your mixes, but it should be the last stage of your mixing. You should get everything else sorted first in terms of levels, equalization and dynamics, and this really is the final sweetener to take your stuff to the next level. And you can add in different parts of the mix as well. It doesn't just need to be drums. So here it is without the parallel compression, and then with it. Now I've done quite an extreme example so you can hear the difference. Another way that parallel processing is super useful is for harmonic mixing. Now this is something that you might do in the music production stage as well when you're just doing your sound design. But let's have a listen to our bass line. And you'll see here there is the dry channel, and then in parallel I've created a saturated channel, and I've rolled off all the low end and again applied some quite heavy processing to it, and it's got this really crunchy sound. And what that does is you can hear now how our bass sounds much wider, much more in your face. And that's because I've added saturation, I've added some chorus, which adds some stereo width to it, but I'm also making it sure it works in mono. So again, that's parallel processing, but using Ableton's audio effect rack rather than an auxiliary channel. Again, every single DAW has got the capabilities for these techniques. And this is probably one of the tools that's had the biggest impact on the quality of my mixes in recent years. But again, I should state it's something that should come quite far down in your mixing workflow, which we're going to cover in one of the later modules. So continuing the theme of advanced compression techniques, next we are going to have a look at sidechain compression. And if you've heard of it, you probably already know about ducking with your kick, but there's a lot more to sidechain compression than that, so we're going to have a look at it in the next lesson.